welcome to episode 97 of the podcast we call Two Chairs Talking. My name is David Grigg and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, the jet-setting Perry Middlemiss. Seems like only a month ago he was in Morocco, but soon he's heading off somewhere else. Where are you off to, Perry?
Hello, David. Yes, this coming weekend, off to the wilds of India, having about 3 weeks in that very, very large country, having a bit of a look around a few spots, going to see the Golden Triangle, Delhi, Jaipur, Taj Mahal, Dinah Seat, all that sort of stuff. Varanasi, so, the Ganges, and then heading down to the southern states of India, right down the pointy bit, if you want to call it that, to Kerala, and then up to Goa, and then home. So we're away for about 3 weeks.
Wow!
Looking forward to it. Got the pills all packed.
Good.
Got the sanitizer all packed, just to make sure that we don't get any tummy upsets. I'm generally pretty good with that sort of stuff. I very rarely get ill or dose of the runs or anything when I'm overseas. But I must admit these days I am very careful about the water I drink, and you have to make sure that it's all the bottled water, and you have to make sure that it is the bottled water with the unbroken seal.
Oh, okay.
Yes, you don't want to fall for one of those. Here it is. Here's a bottle of water for you. By the way, it was almost empty, so I filled up from the tap for you. No, let's not go there. No, let's not go there. Let's make sure that everything is peelable and everything is washed. And no, I think we'll be okay. We just, see how we go.
No, it'll be a very interesting trip, I'm sure.
Well, it should be, and I hope that it is. This is a sort of leftover from some COVID credits we had with one particular tour company. Most of that was used up with Morocco, and the rest of it, plus some more money and cash from us, is being used up for India. And so, we're looking forward to it. Been thinking about it for a fair while, and it's just rolling around. Everything just rolls around.
Indeed.
David, it just keeps on ticking on.
There you go. How exciting.
Yeah, well, the other thing, of course, was I've just come back from the National Science Fiction Convention up in Canberra.
Oh, yes, tell us all
weekend.
about that.
Well, it was pretty good, actually. It's really good to see that there is a convention. I was going to say convention, but convention tradition still going on, which is good. It is very much better seeing people face to face and being able to sit down and just have a chat, rather than either doing it over by phone or email or anything else. So, and just seeing people again is good. They had about 130, 140 people there, so it was pretty good turnout. Yeah. And a few things were said, and a few plans were made. And
now you were the fan guest of honour. So how did that go?
I was the fan guest of honour. Well,
did you have to give a speech?
Well, I appeared on 3 panels, one each day. First one was about bidding for a World Science Fiction Convention, and I was up there with Rose, and our major line was, just don't do it. Or if you are going to do it, just be aware of what it's going to do to you. And I mean, some people were a bit shocked about what we had to say, but Rose and I was talking a bit, Rose would be nodding, and then Rose would talk a bit, and I'd be nodding, and we were in perfect agreement about this, that it is a hell of a lot of hard work, and you've just got to be ready for it. And if you're not ready for it, it's going to come and bite you.
Yeah, that's what happened to me. I wasn't ready, and it bit me.
Well, it's going to bite you really, really hard. And, so I think after about sort of 40 years, you're just about over it, David.
Just about.
Not quite. Yeah. Just about over it. No, it's a big commitment that people have to get themselves in for, and if they're not ready for it, then it's really going to cause them trouble. Then I also had a chat with Lee Edmonds about fanzines, which was very interesting, and he made a very major salient point that the production of fanzines really follows the office technology. in the sense that it used to be old ditto or rodeo machines with stencils, and then it moved into word processing and photocopiers, and now we've moved on to word processors, publishing software, and PDFs, and uploading things onto into the cloud, so that we've given things away in terms of postage and printing. I mean, we think about how hard it was back in the 80s, let's say, 70s and 80s, where you had to produce all the material, then you had to duplicate it, then you had to collate it, then you had to pack it all together, then you had to package it, then you had to send it out. So you had to pay for the printing and pay for the postage. And it was a heck of a lot of time to actually get stuff together. And now it's just a matter of you can do it all from the privacy of your own office, in the sense of doing it all together, putting it up into the cloud, or sending it out via email and say, right, there you are. But there are limitations with that, of course, in terms of the way people are going to act or react when you send them a fanzine. So that was a very interesting discussion. And then I was up again with Lee Edmonds because I didn't really want to give a speech, David. I mean, what have I got to say? I mean, I talk enough here as it is. And so anyway, I just asked Lee if he would basically sort of semi-interview me, which he did. And as he said, his aim was just to ask me a question and just sort of stand back, just let me go. And as Rose Mitchell said, don't worry about Perry, you can just talk the leg off a chair if you have to, which is probably right.
I noticed.
Yeah, I know, and I'm sorry about that. I have to apologise to you and to the listener that if I bore them shirtless, that basically I'm going to just, rabbit on and just keep going until somebody hits me on the head. It's a bit like that idea of, maybe I've said this joke before, but a work of art takes two people, one person to produce it and one person to bang them over the back of the head when it's finished. Just to stop them from going on any further. Yes, my problem is I don't stop, but I should do that now. But it was a good time. It was great. There is going to be news of other conventions coming up next year. One in Melbourne, probably, which is really going to be good to see that kicking off again. And so, all in all, had a great time. I want to thank the Kat Sparks, who was the guest of honour liaison, and also the Conflux committee for having me there. Seemed to go okay. I was told I was sort of an okay guest, and so that was all right. No, a bit more than that, but I was. But it was good. Got a few laughs here and there. Hey, what else can you ask for?
Oh, that's all we need.
That's it. Indeed. That's all we can do. So, that's it. I don't think I'm going to think more to talk about in terms of where I'm going, at least for a while.
Let's talk about some more general news then.
Yes, well, you've got some, I believe.
I've got one.
I've got a couple.
You want me to start with mine?
Yes, you head off.
Okay. Well, we don't often talk about this one. This is the National Book Awards of the United States. And it's one of those awards that's always worth keeping an eye on because there's some plums come up, I think, in that list. So I just thought I'd just go through this year's list. Now, some of the authors' names are going to be very challenging, so we'll see how we go. So this is the finalists of the Fiction Award for the US National Book Awards. And we have Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Ajay Brenya. I'm sure that will be badly pronounced, but there we go. That's the best I can do. Temple Folk by Alia Bilal. This Other Eden by Paul Harding. The End of Drum Time by Hannah, this is Finnish name, Pylva, I'm not going to even pronounce it, Pylevane, something like that. And Blackouts by Justin Torres. And on the long list for the awards was a book called Loot by Tanya James. So I've got two, out of that list and the long list, there's two books I've got on order from the library. One is This Other Eden, and the other is Loot. Both which look very interesting. So anyway, we don't know the winners of those yet. They'll be announced later this year.
Okay. I'm always a bit worried about them. I think the National Book Award is one of those US Book Awards for people that are either citizens or long-term residents of the US. Yes, that's fine, which basically means that people that are not long-term residents of the US are not eligible.
Don't get a look in. No.
Yep. So I don't know why they the organisers of the Booker Prize decided to change their arrangements, where it should be residents of the Commonwealth and Ireland. But anyway,
there you go.
They did it. So
not our decision.
Yeah, no, it's not our decision. We can lament it. I very much doubt that an Australian author will ever win that again. In fact, I don't think an Australian author now will ever get shortlisted. But for various reasons. So,
for the Booker.
Yeah, for the Booker. Well, the problem is the book has to be available in the UK in the year for eligibility. So it has to be published in the UK. UK publishers will not take on the publishing rights for Australian books unless they can get full Commonwealth rights.
Yeah.
And so an Australian publisher down here is not going to say, well, yeah, we'll give up our publishing rights and give it to you so that you can publish in Australia and you can make the profit. So Australian books are published in Australia and not published in the UK until some time later. So it's just a mess. So it really just needs to be cleaned up. But is that ever going to happen? Don't know. Anyway, my award details, news rather. First lot coming out of the National Science Fiction Convention are the Ditmar Awards, or the Australian Science Fiction Achievement Awards, depending on which ones you want to call them. I'm not exactly sure what the official name is, but everybody calls them the Ditmar, so let's just start with that, shall we? So the best novel was 36 Streets by T.R. Napa. The best novella or novelette was a tie. And this is an very interesting tie for you, David. The winners were Remnants and Bad Water by Karen Warren, and the other one was The Smell of Waiting by Karen Warren. Odd, but there we go. Best short story, Everything's So Slow and Quiet by Karen Warren. She had a pretty good award.
Yeah, she's obviously an author we should be looking at.
Well, we should be looking at, yes. Anyway, and the best fan writer went to Cat Clay.
Yes,
this is the one that you and I nominated for, along with Bruce Gillespie.
Probably well deserved.
And basically it was you, me, Bruce, and somebody we don't know, and the person we don't know won. So there we go.
She writes fiction as well as fan writing too. So
okay, there you go. So that's probably why she's got a lot more
she's probably better
visibility, shall we say,
I'm sure.
than us.
No, that's all good, I think.
It's the way it goes. I mean, I was sitting in the audience thinking I've got 3 chances out of 4 of standing up to collect an award, and missed out, which is
that's fine. We're all old people. We should go to the young people, I think.
Yeah. Fair enough. I agree with
up
that.
and coming people. Yeah.
Up and coming. Well, the next one's not necessarily up and coming because he's been around for a while. Because the one that I mentioned anyway, the William Atherley Jr. Award for Criticism or Review went to Ian Mond for his reviews in Locus.
Yep.
So Ian Mondi is a Melbourne-based critic, and he writes for Locus magazine, and he will also be appearing at the Nova Mob in November for his end-of-year discussion in terms of the books he really liked for the year. The next piece of news is that the Nobel Prize for Literature has been announced, and the 2023 prize has been awarded to the Norwegian writer John Foss. It's a little bit different to pronunciation. Anyway, according to Wikipedia, his work spans over 70 novels, poems, children's books, essays and theatre plays, which have been translated into over 50 languages. He's the most performed Norwegian playwright after Henrik Ibsen. I've always got to be careful about when I pronounce that, because for whatever reason my brain just basically immediately wants to change Henrik Ibsen into Henry Gibson, who is a character off Laugh-In
yes.
Television over 40, 50 years ago. And currently the Foss has productions presented on 1,000 stages worldwide.
Good heavens.
And he's one of the most performed contemporary playwrights globally.
Wow.
There you
That's
go.
amazing. And yet I haven't really heard of him.
No, I haven't either.
And he writes novels too, doesn't he?
He does, and I believe that he writes in a Norwegian dialect, which only about 10% of the Norwegian population actually speaks.
Oh, crikey.
I didn't know there was a Norwegian dialect, but there we go. See, you learn something all the time.
You do. Interesting.
Now, that was interesting. Firstly, that because it's a Norwegian playwright and he's very, very popular. So that's a bit odd for one thing, that the Nobel Prize is going to a popular writer rather than somebody that most of us had never heard of, even though he's popular and still haven't heard of him. So I think it just shows, David, that we are not really in the mainstream.
That's true.
Of a lot of this. But anyway, oddly enough, this announcement of the Norwegian Nobel Prize winner came up about the same time that I came across a mention of the fact that there was another Norwegian writer that I really should be trying to track down. And this is a guy by the name of Moritz Hansen. Now, he was a Norwegian writer that lived between 1794 and 1842.
Okay.
And you might think, well, why are you interested in him? Well, he's actually supposed to have written the world's first crime novel. Okay. Most people assume that the first crime story that ever came out was Edgar Allan Poe's short story, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, in 1841. But this particular author, Moritz Hansen, wrote a book in Norwegian, and I'm not going to pronounce it in Norwegian, I'm going to give you the English translation of the title, and it's called The Murder of Engine Maker Rolfsson in 1839, 2 years before Edgar Allan Poe produced his story. Now, the weird thing about this is there's no English translation of it that I can find.
That's a pity.
And a friend of the podcast, Lucy, I got in contact with a friend of the podcast, Lucy Sussex, to ask her about this. And she said, yes, she was aware of it. And she has actually attempted in the past to try to persuade a couple of people to actually translate it for her, but to no avail. Now, this raises the question for me, David, that you being the AI expert of the two of us, that I would like to run past you. As you can understand, probably the major reason why people don't want to translate it is that undertaking a translation is a lot of work. So you really want to make sure that you've got a market for it before you even start. So in other words, you need to have a contract from a publisher. And if no publisher is willing to give you the money up front, why would you do it? So that makes sense. So what happens if we have a situation where we have a translation undertaken by an AI so that it is translated from Norwegian into English? Now, you can pretty much state that the end result of that is going to be a fairly stilted piece of prose, but it's going to be understandable, and it might just need a edit over the top by an editor in a publishing house to get it into shape, or to, once it's actually had the most of the translation done, to employ somebody to run another English version over the top. So the question is, do we as readers see this as an acceptable practice, or do we see it as a means of making available those books, make sure they're out of copyright, because this is well out of copyright. I mean, the author's been dead for 180 years, but it's not available in English. And this is a very important book in the world of crime fiction, if it's the very first one. And if it was possible to be able to translate this book by some AI version or some AI application, would that be a reasonable thing to do? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, the issue would be the accuracy, and it's all very well to do a first cut translation of something. I mean, we've all used Google these days. Use Google Translate, which is a wonderful tool.
Yeah.
But I'm sure we all know that it's by far from being perfect, and it makes mistakes and misinterprets, literally misinterprets what the meaning of a word is, because there can be words that sound the same or are spelt the same but mean different things. And I always go back to the Italian phrase, traduttore traditore. The translator is a traitor. You know, the person who translates a book is a traitor to the culture. There's
That's
something in that. It's a bit harsh, but there's something in that, I think. So a machine doing it is even more of a traitor, I suppose. But I think it could be done, but I think you'd have to have someone who spoke Norwegian to go over the translation. You know, the machine could do the bulk of the work.
Yep.
But you would need someone who understood the language and probably understood the culture, because that's the point about the Italian phrase. Is you really need to not understand simply the words, but the culture that's behind the words, to do a good translation. So I think it would be very difficult to have a machine do it.
Yeah,
without it being then very carefully edited by someone who did understand both languages.
So you're saying that the practicalities are easy enough, but it's the end result that you're after, because you really don't want to destroy the reputation of a work by having a shoddy, machine-driven translation that doesn't really give you the full sense and essence of the original work, and just skims over the top. Yeah, but I think, look, I wouldn't be surprised if some publishers actually take this up, if they think there's a dollar to be made.
Oh well, that's the trouble.
Out of translating it, because and the difficulty is how many people would read this book. Well, I reckon a lot of people would read it, purely on the basis that if it was the very first crime novel. If it's could be verified as such, it's the very first crime novel ever written, then a lot of people would read it purely for the historical purposes. I mean, I'm currently reading E.M. Forster's A Passage to India, because I'm going to India, right? But that's like 100 years old, that novel. And, well, we read it because it has a reputation, and because of where it fits into literature in general. And this book, I would think, would have a fairly high level of interest in it, and it would be interesting to have a look.
The simple answer, Perry. You just have to learn Norwegian.
Oh, great! You can. I could actually buy a Norwegian e-book for $10.
Okay.
But no, it would take me until I die before I'd learn Norwegian, I would think. Nah, I'm not going to go there. But I just thought the whole point about having that initial cut of translation was an interesting one. And
I'm sure it would make life easier.
Yeah, oh, well, I think it would, and I think that you heard it here first, folks. It may be happening at some time in the future. So, look, if we can make available a lot of those untranslated works from other cultures and other languages that we've never had a chance to see, well, we just get swamped with a whole lot of other books we're never going to be able to read, David. But there we go.
That's right.
At least they'll be available for us to look at and go, gee, I wish I had time to read that, rather than sort of not having them there at all, because this one in particular is just not available. I can't find it. Maybe there is an English translation. I can't find it.
No. Oh, well, interesting.
Oh, I think that is interesting. I think that one in particular is. And just, okay. The little things that you see, you pick up you find out that the Nobel Prize for Literature has been won by a Norwegian, and then you end up finding this little snippet of information about the earliest crime novel ever written. So I don't know how the connection came together, but it just all rolled into one.
Interesting. All
right. Shall we get on to what we've been reading lately?
Well, we've been actually
reading. Yeah. Give the listener something to chew on. About what we have been up to. Now, this is a book. My first book. Is one that I had hoped to be able to fit into our crime fiction episode last time, but unfortunately I didn't quite finish it in time, and we also had quite enough going on as it was for me to sort of rabbit on about this one. But the book that I wanted to review, and what I'm going to review today, is called All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby, published earlier this year. This is pretty good, David. This is a good book. I've spoken about S.A. Cosby before to you.
Yeah, you have. Yeah.
The couple of books, Blacktop Wasteland and Razorblade Tears, both of which have been picking up awards in the years in which they have been published. And I would suspect greatly that this one will also be another one of those that will pick up those awards. So S.A. Cosby's, there's one earlier book than the two that I've read, which I've got to try and track down. But this is about his fourth novel. And I can see a very, very steady and constant progression of his writing style and what he's dealing with and what he's looking at from the early ones, working their way through. I think he's getting his plotting better, and I think he's just getting his writing better in general. So anyway, just a bit of an information about this particular book. So a year after Titus Crown is elected as the first African-American sheriff of Sharon County in Virginia, he's called to an active shooter incident at the local high school. When he gets there, he's confronted by a local man that he knows, who's also African-American. So that's a bit weird, because that normally isn't the case. It's normally young white men or young white women it's becoming more of now who do these shootings at local high schools. Anyways, this man is carrying a gun and threatening police. And he's eventually killed by another police officer when he raises his gun and generally points it at the sheriff. Although the sheriff doesn't think that he was going to get shot, his compatriot, a white constable, shoots this man, shoots him dead. When they get into the high school and have a look around, they find out there really is only one victim. So it wasn't a sort of a rampant shooting of everybody. There's just one victim, and it's a teacher. He's very, very popular in the school by the name of Mr. Sherman. Everybody's very shocked that this has happened because he was, sort of the pillar of the community. He was absolutely fantastic. But Crown starts doing a bit of investigation to try to work out what goes on, and he's able to break into Sherman's phone using, of course, finger recognition. He goes down to the morgue and gets the finger on the iPhone and breaks into it. And he finds a whole lot of stuff there that he's not really very happy with. There's a lot of still photos and videos of Sherman and the man who was the shooter who shot him, and one other man who are abusing and killing young African-American children. So Sherman's very shocked with this and realises that two of the three that were involved in all of this are now dead, but there's a third one that's out there. But he's heavily disguised in these videos, so you can't actually see him, to the extent that he's wearing gloves, he's wearing a full face mask, he's wearing gloves, and also the gloves are taped to the sleeves of his whatever outfit he's wearing. So we're dealing with a fairly nasty piece of a nasty crime in a small country town, and a lot of people believe that it's been set up, that Sherman could not basically have done all this because he was such a wonderful guy and so many people trusted their children with him that that couldn't possibly be the case. And so they believe that Crown and the police have set up this whole thing to try and, well, I don't know, just to do whatever and try to inflame race relations. Anyway, following the information that's on the phone in terms of when the phone was carried and where it was, the police find in the nearby woods the bodies of 7 young African-American children, and they're able to date some of their disappearances over a period of 10 or so years. So it's not been happening in a short space of time. This has been going on for quite a long period of time. And it starts to tear this town apart. So Cosby's novel is as much a police procedural, because he has to try and track down who this person, this missing person is, as it is a full-blown commentary on the current state of race relations in the American South. Mm. And having it run this way gives you gives you a double look at what is happening with race and crime, with poverty, because this is a fairly poor area of the South, and it's a fairly confronting book, but it really is a very, 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 very good one. Now, a number of readers who will come across this are probably going to be thinking, "Oh, there's far too much violence here," and I don't want to really go off, and the body count's too high. You don't get a lot of graphic detail. Well, at least I did. I wasn't put off by the graphic detail of the crimes. There is some description of what the bodies look like, but that is about it. So while it does fit into the serial killer subgenre, we shouldn't really assume that whole subgenre is completely played out. I think that there's quite possible for new and interesting variants to be written about that particular subgenre, but they have to basically be pretty good ones, and this is one of them. And I think that if you can get past the idea of the crimes and how they've been committed and move on to seeing what Cosby does with his intergenerational problems with his father and his brother, and also the problems that he has purely by being an African-American man in control, or as a lawmaker in a town where the American South is still, and a lot of those racial problems are still very much rampant. It's quite an interesting look at what's going on. So I can heartily recommend this one. I gave it 4.4 out of 5 for this particular book.
There you go. That sounds interesting, but yes, confronting by the sound of it. Yeah.
Well, it is confronting, but it's also, well, it's the point, isn't it? What's more confronting? Is it more confronting about the death of the children? Well, that's one thing. Or the way the race relations are basically being handled in this town. That's another. And they're both a bit disturbing, but they both have to be looked at. And if you can look at them in a piece of fiction, it's probably as good a way to do it as any.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, well, I'm going to start with my first book, which is called The Will of the Many by James Islington. And this was a review copy I was given by Text Publishing, so thank you to them for that. This certainly looked an interesting book when one of our friends recommended it to us. James Islington is an Australian author who has apparently had quite a lot of success with a previous fantasy series called the Licanius Trilogy, which I haven't read. But this book, The Will of the Many, is the start of a new series, a new trilogy, I believe. Now, I have to say I did find reading this daunting because it's just so long. The actual book, the physical size of the book itself is just a bit daunting. You know, sort of get a slab, this brick. It's 625 pages of quite small type, I thought. So I estimated by doing some counts, line counts and so on, and word counts, it must be about 250,000 words, 250,000 words, more likely 300,000 words. Now, I'm not put off by long books in general. I've talked about on this podcast about Donna Tartt's The Goldfinch, which is nearly 800 pages long, which I loved, and I couldn't. It was like a page turner. I couldn't put it down. However, I found The Will of the Many much more difficult to get through. But I think that's mainly because I'm just not really a big fan of this kind of long, drawn-out fantasy. And some people are, and that's my fault, not the authors. And I'm sure there are people who will love this book and its sequels. But anyway, so let's put that aside, the whole business of how long it is aside. Let's try to look at it objectively. So what's the book about? It's something of a coming-of-age story with a bit of, really quite clever bit of world and society building behind it. I'm unsure whether to call it fantasy or science fiction, because we've always got to bear in mind what Arthur C. Clarke said, any sufficiently advanced technology is going to look like magic. Now, here the technology is a means of gathering and harvesting the will of many people so that it can be directed by the elite few in the top ranks of the hierarchy that makes up the society. And it's all part of an empire called the Catinian Empire. Now, so just to explain how that works, for me to explain how that works, the people at the lowest level of society, who are called the octavi, can voluntarily, in quotes, because it's not really voluntary, you can either do it or you can starve, voluntarily cede some of their willpower to their masters in the next level up, who are called the septimi. And of course you go up, the sextus and the quintus and so on, and all the way up to the top. So this gathered willpower can be wielded like powerful magic to do all kinds of things. But below even the octavi are prisoners who are shackled to these devices called sappers, which literally sap all of their willpower. So they just have to lie there. So they're helpless and barely alive. Now, the Catinian society, which has developed since some sort of vague cataclysm we've not told much about, is very heavily based on the old Roman Empire. And you've got senators and you've got, gladiator-like contests in huge amphitheatres. There's a great deal about it, which is like the old Roman Empire. Anyway, let's get to the main character. At the beginning of the book, we're introduced to young Viz, V-I-S. And as the story opens, he's living in an orphanage and he's working in a prison, tending to the prisoners who are shackled to these sapper devices, who can't do anything for themselves. But Viz has a secret. He's actually a prince, the sole remaining member of the royal family of an island which was invaded and taken over by the Catinians. If they find out who he is, he'll be immediately executed. Now, while he's working in the prison, he comes into contact with a visitor who turns out to be a quintus, so he's higher up on the hierarchy, fairly high in the hierarchy. And he is able to with a visitor who turns out to be a quintus, who's able to harness the willpower of thousands of underlings. This man, Ulcior, sees something useful in this and recruits him to helping investigate goings-on in the Empire's academy, which is like a private school, or the Empire's school, to train up the officials of the future. Now, Ulcior wants him to do this because Ulcior's brother, who was a student at this academy, died mysteriously the year before under what Ulcior thinks is suspicious circumstances. So, to cut a very long story short, Viz, who is now Ulcior's adopted son, ends up as a student at the academy, where he must rise through the ranks as well as investigating the death of Ulcior's brother. Sorry, I shouldn't forget to mention that before he gets to the academy, Viz has single-handedly stopped the massacre of thousands of people in an amphitheatre. But this is a terrorist attack by a group of resistance fighters. But it doesn't actually stop it before many thousands of them are gruesomely murdered. I found that whole passage very hard to take, to be honest, because it's just thrown off without any sort of real emotional impact of the loss of this many lives. Yeah, they're all octavi, they don't count. It's as though 9/11 had happened and everyone just shrugged it off as no big deal. So, a complicating factor is that Viz has been secretly contacted by the resistance group who were trying to recruit him. And he naturally sympathises with their goal since he hates the Empire, which invaded his land and killed off his whole family. But he objects to their methods, such as murdering thousands of innocent people. But dealing with all of these conflicting demands is extremely difficult for him, but as this book comes to an end, Viz has indeed risen to the top rank in the academy, won the prize for completing a dangerous quest, uncovered very, very mysterious doings, and fallen in love. A great deal remains unexplained, and there are many loose ends left deliberately dangling at the end of the book. So no doubt you'll need to read the second and third books in the series to find out what has really been going on. Look, it wasn't for me. It was well enough written. It has a very clever concept. I thought this whole business of the seeding of will. There's some interesting ideas, and once the story gets going, it is quite engaging. And the right audience for it will doubtless love it and eagerly await the following books. But I won't be among them, I'm afraid.
Bit too much to be going on with. I can see that.
Yeah, but some people will love it. It's the kind of big slab of a book in a series that lots of people love that kind of book. It's just not me.
Well, this big epic fantasy stuff that goes on and on and on, and I mean, just got to look
Wheel
at
of Time sort of stuff.
Yeah, have a look at what Brandon Sanderson's doing with his Firelight books. Those 10 to 15 books, all of them are around about 800 pages. I mean, oh my God, just goes on and on forever. It's a fair commitment that he's asking for from his readership, but there's a lot of people out there that are willing to take the journey, and good luck. If you find that there is a series that you can latch onto that is going to keep on going and keep on delivering the reading pleasure that you want, all power to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good luck. If you can do that, because it's sort of something that a lot of us look for and we don't necessarily find. And if you can find it, carry on. Keep going.
Yeah, sure.
I'm certainly not going to criticise people for wanting to do that. I'm in awe of their, as I said, their ability to be able to commit to that amount of effort with one particular author.
Yeah, well, it does block out any other sort of reading.
That's a fair bit. I mean, like 600-800 pages. I mean, that's like, for a lot of people, that's well over a couple of months worth of reading.
Yeah.
Just there with one book. And there's a heck of a lot of other novels and titles out there yelling at us, David, screaming, "Read me!" But I like them. I like the shorter stuff these days. I must admit, I'll dip into the big ones every now and again, but the shorter books are the way to go, which is exactly what I've come up with my next particular novel. It's called The Odd Angry Shot by William Nagle. Now, I don't know whether you've heard of this. It was
I've heard of it. The title sounds very familiar.
Yeah, the novel was written in 1975, and a film adaptation was made of it in the late 70s with Graham Kennedy and John Jarrett and a number of other Australian actors. So, I think probably The Odd Angry Shot is known mostly by people because of the film, and that's fair enough. Now, I don't know about you, David, but back at the end of 1972, when the Gough Whitlam's Labor Party was elected to federal government, I was 17. I hadn't actually been able to vote in that particular election. You may have. You're a year or two older than me. It wasn't until the next election that I was able to vote. But around about that time, Australia had been involved in the Vietnam War since about 1964. And while they were sort of slowing down their involvement, they were still sort of committed to staying with the Americans in Vietnam. But the Labor government stopped the conscription, as it was then, and the conscription, as you might recall, was done via a lottery of a ballot, where birthday dates were pulled out of a rotating ball and somebody twirling it on television. And
the only
lottery
you don't want to win.
Oh yes, actually.
Yeah. Well, I was in the ballot.
Oh, okay. Well, I was too young to be in the ballot. My brother was probably about 6 months away. I was a couple of years off. A friend of mine actually won the ballot, and was probably going to have to present himself for national service, 2 years worth of national service, sometime in early 1973. But Whitlam stopped it all, and this friend of mine tells me that he's only ever won one lottery. It was the one that he didn't want to win.
I see, yes.
And so it was a nasty bit. And look, Australia basically ended up having around about 60,000 people in the war in Vietnam, of which 520 odd were killed and about 3,000 were wounded. The whole thing was bloody ridiculous then, and it still is. And you look back on it and you think, what the hell were we doing there? It just... Anyway, so this actually is a book written by a man who was fighting in Vietnam. William Nagle enlisted in the Australian Regular Army in 1964 when he was about 17 or 6, almost as soon as he could. Maybe it was one of those things that he thought, get into the army, get a job, learn a skill, learn a trade. Maybe I can make something of myself. But unfortunately, he got sent off to fight in Vietnam. Now, he qualified as a cook, so he was working behind the scenes, but he was still had to learn how to fight and shoot and parachute in, because even if you're a cook, you're still got to basically jump in to various places and fight your way through to set up a base and then try to defend that base later if needs be. Anyway, so he was in Vietnam from about June 1966 until middle of 67. Then ended up leaving the army in 68 and ended up writing this book about his experiences in Vietnam in the mid-1970s. Now, the book follows the lives of 3 SAS army personnel, Harry, Rogers, and the unnamed narrator, who I think in the film is called Will or Bill. And it's how they struggle and go through the daily grind of survival. The book's told in rather episodic fashion, so you get sort of a series of anecdotes, one following another after another. So there's no sort of overall arc of what's going on in the war, because these guys at the bottom level didn't see any arc. And it was just, what am I doing today? What am I going to be doing tomorrow? Am I going to be alive in 2 weeks' time? This sort of stuff. So the episodic fashion really mirrors their experience of these 3 men. And so you get, most of the time, they just sit around being bored, trying to work out what they're going to do. They play cards, they drink too much, they go out and get into trouble because they've got nothing else to do. And then they have moments of sheer unadulterated terror as they have to go out on patrol and try to survive through to the end of the mission that they've been given. So they've got the problem, of course, with wars of this type, that they've got an enemy they can't differentiate from the local population. The climate's humid and raining, and it's just disgusting. They've got continual foot rot and sexually transmitted diseases, and they can only dream of going home and just basically getting through to the end of it and getting to the end. Now, this is obviously an anti-war novel, purely because it just shows you war as it actually is. And guys, it seems to me that when guys are out on patrol and they get shot in this particular climate, there's not really much chance for them, because the weaponry that was available in the Vietnam War just basically used to blow guys apart. You either, if you got wounded, you got badly wounded, and most likely that if you got badly wounded, you're probably going to die. This is a very, very interesting. I found it a very interesting book because it spoke to me and I can remember being at that time of about 17, thinking, I'm going into university, sooner or later I may end up getting called up. What am I going to do? Am I going to go? Am I going to register? And it's an interesting book from that perspective for me. I mean, I can understand that a lot of people are going to go, Vietnam War, it's like so long ago, who knows anything about it? But it changed the whole face of Australia, the Vietnam War, and its aftermath of the people from South Vietnam fleeing that country as the communists took over, and a lot of them coming to Australia and changing the whole face of things here. You don't get any of that, of course. This is just purely and simply about what these 3 men endure during their time in Vietnam. Now, Nagle's style is really clipped. I can't really think of another word. The sentences are short. There's almost a total absence of adverbs and adjectives. There's no flourishes here. This is just short, sharp, direct, and really fitting for the material that's actually being presented here. It's a short book. It's only about 150 pages. I think it's very powerful, and I think it's quite an excellent Australian novel. It was featured in the Text Publishing Australian Classics series, which is where I picked it up, and I think it's very worthwhile reading. You can read it in a couple of days without any problems whatsoever, but the the effects of it linger on much longer than the period that you're going to read it. Keep going back to it and thinking about it. After having travelled to Vietnam and it being written, I mean, I can see myself in these people. I really can. I can see myself, if I'd been, say, 5 years older, I could see myself being there. And that's a bit disturbing. So, interesting book. Gave it 4 out of 5.
Very interesting. Yes, I was in that. I was in the ballot for being conscripted, and my number wasn't pulled out. So I was lucky, but I had a couple of friends whose number was pulled out, and I don't think either of them actually ended up going to Vietnam. One had to undergo all the training and so on, but before he was sent overseas, with the Whitlam government came in.
Yep.
And the other one was the conscientious objector.
Okay.
So,
yep.
Yeah. So that was interesting. The other connection from what you were saying about all the Vietnamese people who fled South Vietnam and came to Australia. I'm currently reading a book at the moment, which I'll talk about on the next episode, called All That's Left Unsaid by Tracy Lyon, and it's very much about the children of those immigrants in Australia and their experience as in quotes, foreigners, and their culture coming into conflict with Australian culture, and particularly their parents' experiences, because their parents were the people who'd fled from South Vietnam. So it's a very interesting book. So I'll talk about it in the next episode.
Okay, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah. All right, so my next book is a sort of a classic, I suppose, in a way. It's called Among Others by Joe Walton. Now, the reason I read this book was that it won both the Nebula and Hugo Awards in 2015, beating Embassy Town by China Miéville, which I thought was one of the best books of science fiction I've ever read. So I thought, Among Others, must be damn good. And so, if it won these awards ahead of Embassy Town. So I thought I should go ahead and read it. And I did, and I kind of enjoyed it, but it's a strange book in some ways. I actually wonder what the audience of it was meant to be. So I'll try to explain that. As far as I can see, the reason that it won the awards that it did, it was that it plays very much to science fiction fans, because it has heaps of references to classic works of SF and fantasy, and even to science fiction fandom and conventions and so on. But I can't really imagine that it would appeal to anybody who isn't already a sort of dyed-in-the-wool SF and fantasy fan, not simply a reader, but a fan. Anyway, I'll come back to this in a bit, but lest I seem to be too negative, I do repeat that I definitely did enjoy aspects of the book, so let's see what they are. So, most of all, among others, is a coming-of-age story of a 14-year-old Welsh girl, Morwenna Markova, although she prefers to call herself Maury Phelps. And even that may not be her real name, for reasons we discover much later. And the story is all told in the first person in the form of her diary entries. There's a little prologue, but apart from the prologue, all her diary entries are from September 1979 through to February 1980. So that sort of period of time. And it's very clear from Walton's own background, if you look it up on Wikipedia, that the book is largely autobiographical. She was born in the town that she says her protagonist was born in and so on, in Wales. But it has some additional fantasy and fictional plot elements. But viewed simply as a semi-autobiographical coming-of-age story, I did find the book quite enjoyable and interesting. So the overarching scenario is that the narrator has abruptly run away from home because of a bitter conflict with her mother, who's described both as being completely mad, and here's the fantasy element, as an evil witch. And as Morwenna is underage, the authorities send her off to live in Shropshire with her father, who's a complete stranger to her because he left the narrator's mother when Morwenna and her identical twin Morgana were only babies. So they're identical twins. This is an important point. We also discovered that a year previous to the start of the main story, the twin girls were involved in some kind of car accident which killed one of them and left the survivor badly damaged. Maury has to walk with a stick and has ongoing pain in her leg. For quite a long while, this is all quite confusing because the narrator refers to her dead sister simply as More. and occasionally hints that the two sisters were a single person. This confusion is in fact deliberate. Then there are the fairies. The narrator can see fairies, and as a child she spoke to the fairies near to her home in Wales, in Welsh of course. And the fairies play an ongoing part in the narrator's life. I actually did like the author's spin on these creatures, which was quite different from... They're certainly not delicate little things with fairy wings, like, sort of in the Enid Blyton books. No way. So I liked her spin on the fairies, the way that they speak, and the way that the author has magic actually work in the book. All of those I thought were original and fresh. And the book as a whole is a homage to the joys of reading and the redemptive power of books. The narrator is only able to connect with her estranged father through their mutual love of books, particularly science fiction. And when she's at school, she buys books. She's sent off to a boarding school. And she buys books, both new and second-hand, as often as she can afford them, which seems to be unrealistically often. And she borrows stacks of books from the library and gets interlibrary loans. She sort of carries stacks of these books back to school. I don't know where she's meant to store this many books while she's living in this shared dormitory, or how she's able to read so many while she's still studying. Let that go. And at the library, she's also eventually able to join a weekly SF fantasy book club, which becomes the centre of her interest and where she's able to make friends. What I found really irritating, though, is the too frequent references to particular works of SF and fantasy, and the author's apparent assumption that her readers have read and remembered them all. Now, remember that this book was actually released in 2011, and the action of the book is set in very late 1970s and early 1980. So all the books mentioned in the novel are from the 70s or earlier. So, and the book's published in 2011. So she's asking readers to be familiar in detail with dozens of books which were published more than 30 years previously. Now, the occasional such reference can be ignored, but if you haven't, for example, read Triton by Samuel R. Delany and thoroughly understood the plot and remembered the names of the main characters, well, good luck to you. I don't know how you're going to manage. Even the very last sentence of the book is a throwaway reference to a book which I haven't read, which I thought completely let down a really moving concluding passage about the narrator's plans for her future. It's this beautiful sort of passage, and you're sort of really getting involved emotionally with this, and then bang, she talks about a book you've never heard of. One line. Well, just let it down completely. Wrecked it totally. So, was this a better book than Embassy Town? Well, it's a very different kind of book. It's not a fair comparison. So all I can say is if I'd been voting in the Here Goes That year, there's no way that my vote would have gone to Among Others rather than to Embassy Town. So what did you think of it, Perry? I know you've read it.
Yeah, I have read it. It's been a while since I really enjoyed it when I read it, although I didn't pick up all the references because I hadn't read all of those books that she was getting to.
Well, neither have I,
And as you say, you sort of feel as though you're missing something from it.
So, yeah, you do.
Yeah, you sort of wonder whether at the time when people voted for it, they thought that, well, maybe they should have read all this stuff and therefore, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it spoke to the community of fandom so well that they thought they had to give it a.
I think that's it. And it's not a bad book. It's actually quite an enjoyable book, as I say. But I just could have done without all this constant reference to all these books that I haven't read.
Yeah, it sounds like it was just way too... asking far too much of a reader to be able to get everything out of it. But maybe then again, people say, well, I'll go back and read it again after I've read some of these other books again, and I can keep going back to it and keep on getting a little bit more out of it each time I get there.
Yeah, maybe. Anyway, anyway, it's not a bad book, but I didn't think it was better than Embassy Town.
Okay. Yes,
but
yes,
very different kind of book.
You've extolled the virtues of Embassy Town to me, and I honestly can't recall whether I've read it or not. I think I must have, but I can't remember. And I should go back and read that. And it was interesting that my talking about China of Medieval, my son's book club recently. It was his turn to choose a book, and they were having to choose a murder mystery. So he actually chose The City and the City.
Oh, wonderful.
And he read that, and he said he was completely and utterly blown away by it, thought it was an absolutely fantastic book. Yeah. But a whole lot of people that were there just could not go through them.
No, they wouldn't be able to.
And it's a tough, that one's a tough book to read. Yeah. And it's odd, though, that Mieville just seems to have gone away from writing fiction at all, which is a bit sad because, he was, he had some pretty damn good ideas and
very original.
Very original thoughts about things, and every now and again something crops up, and like the current Palestinian and Israel conflict, and I talked to my son, sort of saying, well, now you know what City in the City was about. Two countries trying to invade the same piece of land and looking at one particular object or one particular building in a completely different way. So it's a metaphor for a lot of that. And he goes, oh, yeah. He'd already got that. He knew that. So it wasn't me trying to tell him anything new. I already know that, Dad. Now, what else is new?
Yeah.
But
so
anyway,
I've only read a couple of his novels so far, but I'll track down the others. But what I also read a long time ago, the first book of his that I ever read, was a juvenile called Railsea.
Yeah,
and that's completely wacky.
Yeah,
and I love
you're
wacky.
Telling me about that. You love wacky, yes.
I love wacky. I recommend that to anybody who likes that sort of. You'd say it was probably middle school, perhaps older readers, that sort of age group. But that's a wonderful book. I love it.
So, do you think this book, among others, is sort of off-putting because it's demanding so much foreknowledge by the reader?
I just think it would have been better without so much dependence on that. I have read quite a few of the books that she refers to, but it was just a bit too insistent. She could have the author could have done without quite so many references, and it unfortunately depends. Like some of the things that she talks about depends on your understanding. For example, Triton. And the conflicts and characters in that. So that's I just didn't think that worked very well. But yeah. Anyway,
okay,
still quite an enjoyable book.
Okay, well, I'm moving away completely and utterly from that for my next piece because I'm not even going to talk about a book. I'm going to talk about a TV series.
There you go.
This is Only Murders in the Building, Season 3.
Season 3.
I think I've spoken about this previously on the podcast, maybe, or seasons 1 and 2. Yep. Anyway, so this is Disney Plus streaming service. 10 episodes. Each episode's about 35 to 40 odd minutes, somewhere around there. So not 1 hour jobs, but 35 to 40 minutes, not bad. It's a comedy drama, if you like, and I think the basic premise of it is given away by the title. It follows the exploits of three residents of a New York apartment building who are played by Steve Martin, Martin Short, and Selena Gomez. And these three get together in the first season because of their mutual love for true crime podcasts. And when there's a murder that's committed in their particular building, they decide that they're going to undertake one. Well, there's a murder in the second season, and guess what, David? There's a murder in the third season as well. Of course. And so, they call it Only Murders in the Building because they believe that they can only do podcasts when there is actually a murder there, and 3 in a row.
In the same building.
Same building. And it looks like they've got enough material for a fourth one.
Well, we joke about Midsummer Murders. This is the poor little town in England somewhere which has got a murder every week.
Yeah, but basically, I suppose a large apartment building is a bit like a small little town like that, and builds up the same way. Anyway, the murder this time is of an actor who is living in the building, played by Paul Rudd. He is murdered on the opening night of the new play that he is appearing in. And this play is it's directed by Martin Short's character, Oliver Putnam. This is sort of basically Putnam's last chance to make a splash on Broadway after he's been in trouble in the past because all of his plays just basically fall apart and don't seem to go anywhere. And so what happens here is that Paul Rudd's playing the lead role. He actually lives in the building. He's playing the lead role in this this play, and as he comes out on the opening night to give his opening speech, he sort of gags and falls down, and it looks like he's dead. So they have to close everything off, but they get him to the hospital and they clean him up, and he's actually all right, although he's been poisoned, but he hasn't actually expired from the poisoning. So they get home, and of course the opening night's completely ruined, and they can't really do anything. So Rudd goes home that evening after being in the hospital, and the next morning he's found dead at the bottom of the elevator shaft. So you sort of think whoever it was that decided that they were going to kill him, when it realised that it didn't work the first time, decided, well, the next best thing to do is to just maybe push him down the elevator shaft to finish him off. Now, the Martin Short, the Martin Short character, Oliver Putnam, he's directing this particular play. Steve Martin is appearing in it as well as one of the characters. Selena Gomez isn't, but she's still in the building, although looking likely that she may not be there for terribly long because she's been redecorating her aunt's apartment over the last couple of years or so, and she's now finished that, and the aunt wants to sell it and is booting her out. So you've still got the same sort of arrangement of these three characters that basically revolve around each other. Steve Martin's... I really have a lot of trouble with Steve Martin when he tries to overdo the comedy, because I think he just basically pushes it too far. Here he doesn't. Here he just lets the comic parts of the situations come out, and without forcing it too much, like acting like a dumb idiot, and it comes across as much better. I mean, he's just a harmless, gormless idiot who's pretty self-obsessed. Well, Oliver Putnam, Martin Short's character, who is much more likely to be chewing all the scenery and having a great time charging around. He does that very, very well. And his Oliver Putnam character is just like an absolute mess until he finds a love interest, somebody that who happens to come along and who is auditioning for a part in the play, and that character is played by Meryl Streep. But she's wonderful. She's really quite excellent in this, and plays minor character. Does it incredibly well. Putnam's totally smitten, of course, as she probably would be. And look, the whole thing sort of comes together pretty well. You get details of the ever-changing relationships between the three main characters and all the other people that are in the building that are working on the play, or the theatre itself. You get a bit of a look about all the superstitions that go on in New York theatre, where somebody has to try to placate the inhabitant ghost who's in the building, because if they don't, they're never going to get the play off the ground and get it together. And there's some strange character who's been fired from the acting company, who happens to be living up in the loft somewhere, and don't know how he's doing that, but he's carrying on living up there. It's all good stuff. It's all good fun, and it's quite enjoyable. It's I would have thought they would have run out of steam by now, but they're actually not. This is actually quite good. Really, really enjoyable. My only difficulty was, and I guess we got sort of given far too much during the COVID period, when all the episodes for a particular series would all drop within a week or two. Now they're all sort of basically being dribbled out old style. You're only getting one a week. And you're sitting there and you're thinking, I've got a bit of time on my hands, I've got nothing to watch tonight. Why can't I watch another episode of this? Because I'd really like to. And if you're getting to that point and you're thinking, I'd really like to get back to this to watch this, I think it's a good indicator that maybe you've got quite a bit of interest in it. And my wife and I have locked all 3 seasons of this. And I think this one's better than season 2. So I gave season 2 4.2 out of 5. So we give this one 4.3 out of 5.
Oh,
I liked it a lot. I think it's enjoyable and fun. And you can't ask for more than that.
Yeah, there you go. All right. I should thank you for another recommendation that you've made in the past on this podcast about TV series, because my wife and I are currently watching The Bear.
Oh, okay.
Which is available through Disney Plus too.
Yes.
So we're enjoying that. We're only about 3 episodes in so far, so no spoilers.
Is this in the first season?
First season.
Okay. Well, the first season's pretty good. The second one's second one's pretty harrowing. So be ready for especially the long Christmas episode. That one's that's quite something else.
All right. Okay.
But it's a good season. It's a really good show. Yeah. And once you finish that, or if you decide that after you finish the first season of The Bear that you want a bit of light comedy, go off and watch Only Murders in the Building.
Maybe.
There you go.
Yep. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yep. Okay. All right. So I'm going to move back to talking about books, and I'm going to talk about a book called The Wager by David Grann. Now, I remember Perry talking very enthusiastically some episodes ago about another book by this writer, The Lost City of Zed, which I haven't yet read, but I will be doing that. Now, David Grann is a journalist. He's a staff writer for the New Yorker magazine, and he's written several books. He seems to specialise in writing these extremely engaging non-fiction narratives, so engaging that several of them have either been made into movies or are in production to be movies or planned to be made into movies. So the other book of his that I'm thinking of in that respect is Killers of the Flower Moon, which again I haven't read yet, which is being made into a movie directed by Martin Scorsese and starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro, due to be released later this year on Apple TV Plus again. Sounds pretty good. I think I'll be keeping an eye open for that one.
I think it's out in cinemas as we speak.
Oh, there you go.
If it's not, I'm seeing shorts for it.
Trailers things.
In trailers in the cinema. Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, this getting back to this particular book, which is called The Wager, and this is the first, as I say, the first of his books that I've read. But I thought it was excellent. It tells the story of a doomed Royal Navy ship, HMS The Wager, which was shipwrecked on a remote island off the coast of Chile in 1741. And the ship had been part of a British squadron which was trying to intercept a Spanish treasure galleon. But in trying to round Cape Horn at the southern tip of South America, the squadron faced terrible problems. The area of the ocean is notorious for its terrible conditions, as the winds and the waves are sort of concentrated by the gap between South America and Antarctica, which is only about 800 kilometres wide. So there's this constant amount of storms, and the squadron gets separated. And for weeks, the conditions prevented them from passing, because these are sailing ships, obviously, which for weeks, the storms for weeks prevented them getting through this gap or reaching land anyway, during which time the sailors, one by one, fell victim to scurvy, which is caused by the lack of vitamin C. They didn't know that, of course, back then. So the ship The Wager, under the command of its newly appointed captain, David Cheap, was wrecked on the shore of a small island. Many of the crew died, but about 150 of them made it to shore. There they managed to survive for some months, aided for a while by the kindness of a group of ocean-travelling indigenous people, whose help they stupidly squandered. So, the bloody white people, the unthinking ideas of white supremacy, drove off the very people who were saving their lives. And we've seen it so many times before. I reviewed a book here sometime, not all that long ago, called Unknown Shore, which was set in the Arctic, where again the Europeans failed to understand how generous the local people, the Inuit, were being to them, helping them out and saving them. And of course they sort of do all these things anyway. And of course very similar things happened in Australia. Just this assumption of superiority, when in fact they weren't at all superior in the conditions. Anyway, to go back to this particular instance, the survivors of the wager were soon close to starving to death, and disputes soon arose about the leadership of Captain Cheap, eventually leading to a full-scale mutiny under the command of the ship's gunner, someone called John Bulkeley. Now, after many months of desperation and violence and starvation, the majority of the men set off in a rebuilt version they managed to, tack together of the ship's launch under the command of Bulkeley. And they abandoned Captain Cheap and a couple of others to their fates on this island. Somehow this desperate group managed to return to the Atlantic, so navigate their way through the Magellan Channel, which is a slightly different way of getting across. And they managed to return to the Atlantic and eventually to civilization, but not before many of them have died or been killed. Interestingly enough, there were 2 detailed journals written of the events on Wager Island, as the crew had named it. One was by John Bulkeley, this ship's gunner, attempting to justify his actions, and the other by the young John Byron, who survived to become the grandfather of the poet, George Gordon, Lord Byron. And John Byron was one of those abandoned on the island with Captain Cheap, who also eventually survived, surprisingly. But look, it's just a really, really, really interesting book. The author has obviously done a heap of research, but he takes it all and he turns it into this really detailed and gripping story, a tale which you can read like as much interest as any thriller. And the book's subtitle says it all, really: a tale of shipwreck, mutiny, and murder. So you have to read the book to find out how it all actually turned out at the end. But it's very highly recommended. And now I have to go and find all of his other books and read those.
Any cannibalism?
Oh yes.
Good to hear. It's a bit like the Batavia. I mean, you can't have a good shipwreck and without a bit of cannibalism to stir things up, can you?
Well, I mean, it's understandable. You've got these people who are literally starving to death, and they've got a dead body in front of them.
Yeah, but it's an interesting point that you make about the sort of perceived white person supremacy in an environment they do not understand, and there are these people that live there forever, like Burke and Wills going up into
very much so.
The centre of Australia, and the local indigenous population thinking, why the hell are these people dying? And they probably tried to help them out.
Well, that's the interesting thing, is the generosity of these local people. Yeah. Is incredible. These ocean going people who apparently lived their entire lives in boats on the ocean went away and brought supplies to the Europeans, to the British. Several times they sort of went and fished and hunted and brought things to them. But no, the English people are sort of pissing them off and, casting their eyes on the natives' wives and,
Yeah, it's just
crazy
unbelievable,
stuff.
isn't it?
And then
Yeah,
one day the natives are no longer there.
Yeah, I wonder why.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
How many times can we be told to get lost, before you decide, well, I'll just get lost and don't come back.
Well, that's exactly
and
right.
leave you to it. Well, good luck, son. If you think you know what you're doing, get on with it. And
didn't.
oh yeah, what a bunch of weirdos there. Yeah, but David Grann, as you say, writes it's a good narrative.
Yeah, sure.
It's a bit, He's like those other ones that are writing, stuff. Who's the guy that wrote Michael Lewis?
Oh yes.
Yeah, who's done a lot of stuff like Moneyball and so
industry,
on. Yeah. So they write about, they were able to take a whole series of sort of dry, flat facts and dig down into the personalities and get the personal stories out of them. And there's the whole thing about history is it's actually got. It might have HI at the front, but it's got story at the end. And it is actually a series of stories. And if you can find the good ones and find the ones that have a nice narrative to them, and you can find somebody that's written them up well, like David Grann does, yep, it's good stuff. It is good stuff. So, The Lost City of Z, as we was talking about, I keep on coming across stuff from the Amazon basin that people are finding that... was exactly what that guy who was the main character of The Lost City was saying, that it was a large civilization there, and that it died after the Europeans arrived. Measles, smallpox, all the rest of the viruses went through, just cleaned them all up. Yeah, so there you go. It's just anyway. There we go. So I think we're done for this episode.
Yeah.
So we should mention that we've actually got a bit of a break coming up because I'm going away, and we have been busy doing a whole lot of other things and don't have another episode lined up. So we're going to be taking a bit of a break until mid-late November now, about 6 weeks. We're going to skip one episode completely and come back in about the 20th of November. So I better be reading some books when I'm travelling, David.
I was going to ask you how you're going to do that. You're taking an e-book reader, or what?
I have an e-book reader. Yeah, I used to way back when we used to take books away with us, but you pretty much. Firstly, you had to take if I was travelling with my wife, had to take books that both of us were going to read. So that halves the number of books. Then you've got the situation that. You're really going to get the point where you have to be willing to leave them behind, or you have to find some of those libraries, local libraries, where you can put a book in and take another book out, or swap it with other travellers. But these days, with an e-book reader, if you stack a few books up there, put a few things, you get a nice choice of what to read, and you can get. You get some books from the standard ebooks.
Indeed.
A couple there that I'd like to be able to get to and read. So I've downloaded a couple of those, and I will have a bit of a look at them. And when I do, I'll do the right thing, David, and I'll make a bit of a donation through to standard ebooks to help them out. Because I think that's only fair that if you get a bit out of it, you should give a bit back and help them out. So that's it, David. We'll be off for about 6 weeks. The listener can have a bit of a break and go off and listen to a few other podcasts out there and enjoy themselves. But until then,
we'll see you then.
We'll see you then. Okay.
Bye. Bon voyage.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.